Hello YouTube, and welcome to the YouTube recording of the lore debate that was held between myself and Kenny Dawkins. We have recorded this debate a while ago, and this version of the audio is a bit edited to make the sound better in terms of quality. If you look on the top comment in the comment section, there will be an unedited version of the debate on the channel of Mr. Kenny Dawkins, who I was debating in this debate. The debate was made in two parts. In the first part we debate a large part on the Lost Dragonborn's involvement and a bit on Elder Scrolls metaphysics, something I'm not very good at. And there's a second part where we debate more on in terms of Tamriel's politics. I will put markers in the description so you can navigate to either part that you wish to watch. And if you want to watch the full debate, then I recommend just starting at the beginning. I passed the mic to myself from a week ago. So, welcome everybody in the audience, and everybody who might watch this on YouTube later. Welcome to the first lore debate. This debate will be between myself, the runner of the channel, and Mr. Kenny Dawkins. First of all, I want to thank him for appearing on this and for wanting to do this tryout with me, as this format seems like a lot of fun to me, but there needed to be some serious tryout, and Mr. Kenny has some debate experience, so I think that this will be a perfect setup for a little tryout. Before I get into any of the details, Mr. Kenny, you can introduce yourself to both the audience that's present here and to the viewers later in the video.
Hello, I'm Kenny. I come from a Discord debate community. I have a lot of experience, especially with Elder Scrolls. A lot of people know it's one of my better topics. I don't really do Inverse all that much, although I love it. I've debated people like Fudge Muppet and higher ups in the community in the past, and I've actually won. I wanted to give Imperial Knowledge a test, and I wanted to see if he'd be any more of a challenge in Fudge Muppet or Camelworks or any of the other people I've debated before.
Alright. I hope that I'll prove to be good in that sense. On my part, I haven't really prepared super hardcore. I've prepared some things in the time between the debate and work. But yeah, the proposition Kenny and I agreed on to debate on for this is that if Skyrim gets conquered by the Stormcloaks, so if the Stormcloaks win the Civil War, then that the Empire might try to take it back. This is something that I said in one of my videos. That's one of the videos that's been most controversial on my channel. The one where I say that I think what the outcome of the Civil War will be. And Mr. Kenny will try to, I don't know what the right term is in English, attack me on that. So
attack your argument, yeah.
Yeah. Should I begin?
I'd actually like to begin with my proposition first, if that's okay with you.
Sure thing. Go ahead.
One question. I'd like to break this into a first part, right? Can we go over this first proposition or this first presupposition that the last Dragonborn will be helping the Stormcloaks and then later go on to another sector where the Stormcloaks are by themselves?
I would say that I can definitely agree on the fact that if we debate the fact that Skyrim will be Stormcloak after the events of the game, that the Dragonborn has joined the Stormcloaks. However, in terms of what you said, like a second thing, I don't know, how did you phrase it again?
Well, two sectors technically. One, I don't know if you're okay with just debating with if the Dragonborn is on the Stormcloaks team alone, because that might seem a little bit unfair to some. So I wanted to give you like, the principle of charity by like saying that, giving you your own, kind of structure to go under, that we can just assume that, the Stormcloaks are by themselves and that the Dragonborn's trapped in Apocrypha or whatever.
Well, I'd say that the Dragonborn would be a definitely strong asset to the Stormcloaks in this kind of situation. But I'm personally more of a... Well, a lot of people have trouble with the argument that the Lost Dragonborn will be stuck in Apocrypha after the events of Skyrim. But if we look at the evidence from previous games, so if you take a look at Morrowind, if you take a look at Oblivion, we can see that the heroes from those games get pushed into roles where they don't have any significant further actions beyond the playtime that the player has with them. Like the Nerevarine apparently went to Akavir, which is something you can hear in conversations in Oblivion. the hero of Kovac essentially became Sheogorath after the Shivering Isles DLC. These are roles in which at least the personality that the player had can no longer influence the game world after your playthrough. So I definitely have trouble with accepting a situation in which the Last Dragonborn will be supporting the Stormcloaks post Civil War or post Skyrim's playthrough, because while it's interesting to think about, and I'm definitely willing to consider it as a hypothetical, I don't think it's something that we will actually see in the future, as Bethesda has a very, very strong tradition of not letting their heroes do anything post playthrough.
Okay, I know that, right? That's why I messaged you in DM saying that, like, do you want to do this? Because I think it's myself that it's an unlikely circumstance. I'm just saying, like, a good hypothetical that we could, discuss, that if the Dragonborn was to, hypothetically help the Stormcloaks during, an Imperial invasion, would it change the overall outcourse of, the war?
I mean, I'm definitely okay with like debating it as a hypothetical, but I would not say that it's a likely outcome in any canon, as like you say yourself. Bethesda doesn't really like to give their heroes big roles, but I'm definitely willing to debate a Dragonborn which will join the Stormcloaks after the events of the game, but I don't think it's likely to happen in canon. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Well, yeah, we don't know whatever's going to happen in canon. We don't know what's going to happen with Skyrim after the events of, Skyrim. So we can't really, predict anything. But I do agree with you that it's a very unlikely situation. I just want to discuss it, for entertainment.
All right.
Okay. One question: do the Imperial soldiers have finite speed and strength?
Sorry, can you please say that sentence again? You have fell away.
Do the Imperial soldiers have finite speed, strength, and durability? Finite.
If you mean with finite, as in the opposite of infinite, then I'd say that, yeah, there is a complete limit to what they can do.
Okay, I'll take your concession on that point. The Dragonborn, you do realize that the Dragonborn has beyond infinite, just beyond inaccessible AP, durability, and speed, right?
I would not agree on that.
Why not?
Because for all terms and purposes, the Dragonborn is a very powerful individual. There are some very interesting theories on what the Dragonborn could be. I mean, I've seen theories saying that they are a reimagining of Talos and a reimagining of Shore. All those sort of theories. Sorry for my English. But I'm personally not very convinced by the idea that the Dragonborn in lore is this very powerful being. It's my personal conviction that while the Dragonborn indeed is very powerful and far more powerful than a regular soldier, far more powerful than, for example, even a dragon, there is a limit to his power, because in lore, individuals aren't as strong as in-game. Because there's a very, very thin line between what makes sense in lore and what makes sense in gameplay. I mean, basically mowing down whole areas of NPCs makes sense in gameplay, but it doesn't necessarily make sense in lore. And this is something that we might not ever agree on if we have completely different visions on it. But I am not willing to accept a proposition in which the Dragonborn is this very limitless figure of power, because the Dragonborn is an empty vessel, essentially, because it's someone in which the player can put their own vision of what they are. And Skyrim and essentially all Elder Scrolls games are set up in such a way where if the player wants the Dragonborn to be someone who is simply a nobody and not even very strong at that, they can do that. But if they want them to be limitlessly powerful, they can do that as well. So I'm not willing to really say that any Dragonborn, or at least not a Dragonborn in canon lore, would be infinitely powerful.
Okay, I've never ever heard someone who said that gameplay mechanics were stronger than lore. That's new. But you do realize that all the feats that we see of the last Dragonborn in lore would support that claim, right? In fact, he has feats that put him above infinite strength and durability and speed.
Since you already told me that you prepared thoroughly, I would love to see what kind of things that are, because the feats in lore aren't necessarily... the feats that you do in gameplay aren't necessarily translated to lore. I mean, we have seen this example with... I believe it was a quest in Morrowind where on Solstheim you basically got confirmed that somebody did it, but that it wasn't necessarily the Nerevarine back then. But it basically was confirmed that quests that we do in-game might be done by other people. So I wouldn't necessarily say that everything that the Dragonborn does in lore also gets done by in-game gets done by the Dragonborn in lore.
Before I start on my point, I didn't really prepare that well. I even messaged Bubbles that like, okay, I'm gonna have to post some last minute scans in your DMs, but you know that's irrelevant. You would agree that the storyline of the Dragonborn though actually happened, right? He did fight Alduin, he did go to Apocrypha and kill Miraak. You would agree all that stuff happened, right?
I'd say that definitely the main questline of Skyrim, and also I think the Civil War and the Solstheim DLC definitely happened with the Dragonborn. That's something I think we can agree on. Okay,
are you aware of who Alduin is?
I am aware of who Alduin is, yeah. The World Eater.
Okay, you know he was going to consume all of Mundus, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mundus contains planets like Nirn, planets like the Sun, planets like Magnus, who are all infinite in size and greater. You do realize like a multiversal cosmology. As well, the Dragonborn could actually move within Sovngarde and fight beings within Sovngarde who are beyond space and time. We know that people in the Elder Scrolls universe can't even comprehend things beyond the barrier of space and time, or even can't even comprehend linear space-time. We know the Dragonborn can't be bound by normal mathematical or spatial temporal dimensions because he can take tax or, you know, not really necessarily get affected by beings like the Ideal Masters who are considered Platonic concepts. We know, I'll get you this information if you want, that people in the Elder Scrolls universe are bound by three-dimensional spatial temporal dimensions. Do you want that?
You can send it if you want, but I think I understand your argument.
Okay, go ahead. You want to refute it?
I don't necessarily want to refute it, but I do wish to make a little bit of a side note to it. As in that a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense. And the fact that Alduin within most theories would actually consume Mundus just in the way that you said, that's very true. But we also know that Alduin, at least in the way as we see him in Skyrim, especially in the way that we fight him in Sovngarde, is weakened. And he isn't as strong yet, and he can't consume Mundus yet. Meaning that I'd say that in the state where we fight him, the Dragonborn doesn't necessarily have to be this very all-powerful being. But I do need to put the asterisk here that I am not necessarily too much of an expert on metaphysical Mundus lore to really make this argument solid. So I'd have to believe you on that. But I do wish to make the little side note that Alduin isn't at his full powers when we fight him, and not in the state where he can actually consume Mundus yet. And thus, that at least in from my point of view, that doesn't have to mean that the Dragonborn is all powerful there yet.
Mind if I make a refutation?
You go ahead. That's what we are debating for.
Well, of course, when we first see him in Skyrim, you know, when he first goes to Hell again, he's not at full power. But we know he gets significantly stronger over the course of the story. In fact, that's the whole point. At the peak of his power in Skyrim, he's existing and actually killing souls who are aspects of Sovngarde. Sovngarde is a place beyond space, beyond time, you know, beyond, you know, normal linear human comprehension, right? His mist, which he spreads throughout the entire, you know, sky that we can see in Skyrim and Sovngarde, right? like Sovngarde is a place beyond, linear, beyond actually infinite mass. It doesn't have it's not bound by any sort of size. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I mean that's basically all of the Daedric planes of Oblivion, and also the other planes that we know that exist aren't necessarily bound by size. I know that idea.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? They're beyond infinite size, or what we consider infinite, right? So even if you wanted to argue that Alduin wasn't even at his peak at that point in time, he would still be massively, infinitely stronger than what we see, a normal Imperial soldier doing.
I very much agree on that, but there's also a little side note that I might like to make to that, as I don't remember exactly who said it. It was either Odoving or one of the Greybeards, where after you battle Alduin on the top of the throat of the world, he is significantly weakened and he needs to flee to Sovngarde in order to consume souls to become stronger again. So, yes, he's infinitely stronger than any mortal. I mean, that's something that you can say for basically any dragon, that they're just standard stronger than any just random Imperial soldier. But what I meant to illustrate here was that the concept of infinite power that you draft for the Dragonborn, that's not necessarily something that I agree with. That I agree with the fact that the Dragonborn is far stronger than any mortal. I mean, if we accept shouts essentially as a form of tonal magic which sort of alter reality, which is my whole understanding of tonal magic, then of course they're infinitely stronger than any random Imperial soldier, but not limitless.
I'll get into the limitless part soon. I'm going to address your Greybeard point of view first. You are aware that when he was talking about that, he was talking about the context of Dragon Rend being used on Alduin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what he was talking about was Alduin's immortality. What Dragon Rend does, it just makes you experience, or makes a dragon at least experience the very concept, the very ideal concept of mortality itself, right? So when Alduin was going into Sovngarde, he was trying to grant back his immortality because Dragon Rend was used on him, right? That's what weakened him. There's nothing to show that it would weaken him, physically, mentally, or, in terms of durability or speed. Other than the fact, he can't fly and, he's not immortal anymore, right? I don't know why this would affect his physical strength, and even then, right? Normal dragons are not limitless in power. I do not agree with that, right? Normal dragons have finite amount of power. This would be shown with them being, killed by Whiterun guards. We can also see, even the feats that we see in Sovngarde from Alduin would very highly support him being beyond infinite strength. And the Dragonborn was able to contest with him.
Yeah.
Oh, may I add another thing?
Oh, of course.
Oh, also, for the last Dragonborn to move in Sovngarde, a place beyond space and time, he has to break the speed equation. Do you know what the speed equation is?
I do, and you know what the funny part about that is? While I agree with you on that idea of the speed equation, I'm not an expert on metaphysical lore, but I've been assured by people who are experts on metaphysical lore that for some reason I am at least studying for physics teacher, and that I cannot put physics into the Elder Scrolls universe. I wish I could, but apparently I can't. So I'm not sure if we can really put the physics equation into all of this, because if we do put physics equations in all of this, at least I've tried in multiple videos, and people have always told me you can't do that because they don't apply to the Elder Scrolls universe for some reason.
Okay, may I address that?
You go ahead. If you tell me something that I don't know about it yet, and I can refute it, then all the better, because that means that I can make more videos about it.
A lot of these Elder Scrolls, cosmology sophists that go into YouTube comment sections saying that you can't compare morality or, cosmology that's from our own to the Elder Scrolls universe, right? If anyone who's actually experienced and studied actual physics, I'm sure yourself, and you went in yourself with Elder Scrolls metaphysics, you would see that Elder Scrolls physics and metaphysics are pretty much almost identical to ours. In fact, they use the same theories that originate from this world, right? Like Platonic concepts, third dimensional axis, laws of physics, laws of reality, laws of logic, laws of nature, things like that. They use the same similar properties and almost the exact same properties. Sure, they take a few liberties here and there, but it's pretty much identical to ours, right? So those Elder Scrolls sophists that go in YouTube comment sections, right? I've debated a few with them and they don't know what they're talking about most of the time.
No, I mean, I completely agree, because the Elder Scrolls universe relies on a lot of the same concepts. But I think that just me playing devil's advocate in this point, a lot of what they are trying to illustrate is the fact that Bethesda, or at least the writers, won't let themselves be stopped by the laws of physics, and they won't mind a physics equation they will not be stopped with giving you some power or not letting you do something just because it doesn't make sense in physics. They'll just say magic, and that solves it. So there's a limit in what kind of equations and how deep we can go into Elder Scrolls lore with physical equations, simply for the fact that the writers of the universe will not be stopped by what's possible and what is impossible in real life. I mean, the whole genre is fantasy, so they definitely won't stop themselves.
You mind if I address that?
I mean, that's what you're here for.
Well, you could justify any line of reasoning with that, unless they outright say that you can apply these same concepts to the Elder Scrolls universe. I think it's pretty logical, to assume based on our own axioms that we can apply them to the Elder Scrolls. I mean, by that logic, you could justify anything. You could say, well, the sentence that they're saying in the Elder Scrolls universe, it means it's something entirely different from our own reality, because, I don't know. We can't judge their word, saying or whatever, right? Because it's completely different from our own, right? And the writers could justify anything with magic, right? So until we have a preponderance of evidence to suggest that the laws of physics, the laws of nature, the speed equation, right, is unviable in the Elder Scrolls universe, we can't outright say, right, that it's we can't use it. In fact, until it's refuted or until something negates it, we can actually use our own presuppositions to assume that these same things exist. In fact, they have to exist. They're axiomatic, especially within the Elder Scrolls universe, since distance and time and speed, all of this exist, right? So until something states otherwise, I think it's more than logical that we can use it.
Yeah, it's hard for me to refute that, as I completely agree, and that's what I've basically built my videos on in these kind of topics. But yeah, at least I've learned, I haven't necessarily learned something new, but at least I'm happy to find someone who agrees with me in that sense. But yeah, if you, to get back to the original debate topic, if you indeed state that a Dragonborn has limitless power, I do not necessarily agree on the fact that a Dragonborn has limitless power, but if you were to state that, then I'd agree with the idea that the Imperial Legion would not be able to take back Skyrim if a Stormcloak, if a Stormcloak victory were to occur. I mean, essentially, if a Dragonborn has limitless power, they will have a god on their side, if that makes sense, or at least something with the power equivalent of a god. And you can throw as many soldiers at that as you want, and they still won't be able to defeat them in a normal combat. However, something that's very interesting is that during the questline for the College of Winterhold, we learned that the Synod, and presumably also the College of Whispers, are looking for very powerful magical artifacts in service to the Emperor. We can learn that when they're at, what's the name of the fucking ruin? Mazulft, where they have the
labyrinth. Is that what you're talking about?
No, they're in Mazulft. There's the Synod researchers, and they are looking for this oculary to find powerful magical artifacts across Tamriel, because they essentially just outright tell you in their dialogue, yeah, we are here to find powerful magical artifacts for the Empire. So I'm not saying that they will find that kind of thing, but we do know that apparently it plays a role in in the Empire's war strategy, and that it is the Empire's strategy to at least try and find something very powerful in terms of magic. And since the Thalmor are also in that questline, it's their goal too, of course. But if they were to find such a thing, and for example, the Eye of Magnus was one of the things that showed on the Mazult Oculary, and if undisturbed, they might have been able to try and get them. They might have tried to get that. I think that with such an artifact, if they had an artifact like that, they might be able to stop or at least invade Skyrim, which has a limitless power Dragonborn on its side. Still not fully agreeing with the limitless part, but I'll indulge in your hypothetical.
Well, I thought I made a pretty good case for it, but agree to disagree. I'm sure I can't give you any examples like on me right now, or at least off the top of my head, but a lot of those magical artifacts, right, that are within Nirn or within these ruins, Alduin and other Daedric princes have laughed at.
I do know that kind of thing, but this is more in... How do I say this in English? I'm more talking about things such as the Eye of Magnus and those kind of things, like also the Magnus' staff, which are of course the direct things that appear in the not Mages Guild, College of Windhold questline. Not saying that the Empire has those kind of things, like absolutely not, but it's something that we know that they're looking for, just in case, and if they might find it, and even if they found it, they probably wouldn't know how to control it. But if they had such a thing, and if they knew how to control it, they would be maybe able to stand a chance against a limitless Dragonborn.
Give them an edge. I understand what you're saying. Assuming, of course, we're also assuming they know where these artifacts are. We know that they know how to use them. We know that they can react in time for the last Dragonborn to even kill them. And I'll agree with you, it gives them an edge, but it's even then, if we grant all those abilities, it's still not guaranteed that it'll really do anything for the Dragonborn. I mean, a lot of those things, like the Eye of Magnus, Alduin tapped in and was eating parts of Aetherius. I mean, there's no implication that the Eye of Magnus would wake Alduin up from a nap, so...
No, but I mean, in that sense, I think we have too little of a understanding of what the actual power levels of these kind of things are. I mean, if you were to put it in gameplay sense, which I'm not planning to do, so take this as a pure anecdote and not really as an argument. But I mean, I've been killed by bandits before in Skyrim, and I was a Dragonborn. So essentially, we know that the Dragonborn is mortal, because you can die in the game. So, it's definitely not the same immortality as Alduin would have in this kind of sense. So, I think that magical artifacts like, for example, the Eye of Magnus, again, just taking the idea that they would know how to control it, and if that they would be able to find such a thing, then they would definitely stand more of a chance against the last Dragonborn than against Alduin, because the whole idea of a player in the game is that you're not on God mode, you can just die, and I mean that's something that the player can do, they can die. I mean, even the greatest Dragonborns in history have all died, so they are still mortals with the blood of a dragon. That's the whole idea of the Dragonborn.
I'd agree to you to some extent, but there are a few problems which I will break down. We know that the Aetherius plane is beyond Magnus itself, and I doubt that the staff of Magnus is going to do anything, to someone who's Aetherius level, or even greater, arguably, if you use the prisoner scaling, but I don't want to use that. Also, on the point about, him being able to get killed by a bandit, again, those are game mechanics, which you did mention. But in lore and in the canon storylines that we know existed to the Dragonborn himself, I mean, in the Dawnguard DLC, we can see the Dragonborn can literally exist without a soul, right? He can exist without his spiritual existence intact with him at that moment. Normal mortals can't do that. So, go ahead.
No, sorry, I can't interject you. Please finish.
No. I'm perfectly fine. I'm perfectly fine.
The way I remember it, again, I haven't, I don't know all this dialogue by head, but is that in the Soul Cairn, Serana at least partly soul traps you with part of your soul. So you can't exactly exist without your soul, if I remember it correctly. Like, I might be remembering this completely wrong.
I can get you the entire video. I have it. I actually had it like a few months back when I was talking to some people. Serana literally takes your entire soul away. Your entire soul is like, it's not partially soul trapped. You are soul trapped, and you have to actually retrieve your soul. I can actually get that for you if you want further reference to something.
No, I'll believe you on it in this sense.
No, I mean, like, if you want it, is what I'm saying.
I'll believe you in this sense. I mean, I don't see you necessarily lying about it, and I can always look it up in like the dialogue tree.
Okay. But that's the problem. Like, especially since, you know, my level, you know, 60, like, especially like when you're level 30 and you do the Clavicus Vial quest, right? And he says like you're already half as strong as me, right? But then like if you use gameplay mechanics, if you're level, you know, I don't know, 90, you're over 1/4, like 1/3 stronger than he is. So like you shouldn't use game mechanics in that kind of sense, because it really gets convoluted. Because are you going to say like a mud crab is stronger than, you know, a Daedric prince because he can kill a Dragonborn with like Daedric artifacts and, you know, all the like fought the Ebony Warrior and all this?
I mean, I think that in the end, this will be just one of the things that we will have to agree to disagree on. I mean, I need to admit that you do make good points with your idea of a limitless Dragonborn, but it's one of those things where I just don't see a limitless Dragonborn existing in lore. Oh god, how am I gonna phrase this? My English.
Well, may I think you just...
Please go ahead.
You personally don't see how it's possible that a limitless Dragonborn can exist within lore because you think it would contradict the narrative that's being told. Is that it?
Not necessarily. I just think that a limitless Dragonborn within lore really defeats the purpose of the Elder Scrolls, where a limitless Dragonborn in lore, especially if they would assist the Stormcloaks in the way that we... I mean, we've agreed on this before, where Bethesda will not let such a thing happen, where post-gameplay the Dragonborn will have grand effects on the world. So, because of that, essentially, because we can be almost as sure as we can be that the Dragonborn will not have any significant impact on the world beyond gameplay.
That's why.
Purely based on that, I don't think that the Dragonborn will have a limitless influence on Tamriel. But I agree that, on terms of your arguments, it could be very possible that the Dragonborn is limitless in power. I mean, I've seen theories where the Dragonborn essentially is an avatar of Shor, or the avatar of some other god. I've seen someone even speculate Sheogorath, even though that makes absolutely no sense, in my opinion. So, in that sense, I can agree with you that the Dragonborn is infinitely more powerful than any regular soldier. But I don't necessarily buy into the limitless power. But that's something I don't think we will agree on. And not something that I or you will be able to convince the other on. But, I mean, if you...
Yeah, I understand. I think we should just go on to what if the Dragonborn wasn't there, and, you know, Stormcloaks, what will happen to the Stormcloaks by themselves? We can just say that, you know, the Dragonborn is...
Sure thing, but for the record, I will concede that if your vision of a limitless Dragonborn is true, and if your arguments are true, which they very well could be. I mean, there's also a fact that I'm just not a metaphysical lore expert at all, so I cannot definitively refute or confirm any of your arguments in that sense, and I can simply work with the knowledge that I have. And with the knowledge that I have, the idea of a completely limitless Dragonborn still affecting Tamriel makes no sense to me. But if we go with the hypothetical, I can definitely agree with you that a Dragonborn on the side of the Stormcloaks will definitely not have the Imperials stand a chance. Like, even with the magical artifacts that I brought up on earlier, I think that you would be right in saying that the Empire wouldn't stand a single chance. I think that you're very right in that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it didn't make sense to me that the Dragonborn was, in excess or immeasurable speed because he was moving in fucking Sovngarde, but, I got slapped by it, and then, it convinced me. But we can move on to normal politics. Are you aware, right, in this hypothetical, the Dragonborn's trapped in Apocrypha, he's at Akravir with the Nerevarine, I don't know, right?
He's just gone. He died by some bandit in his sleep.
He died at a pond with a mud crab.
Yeah.
Are you aware, right, of the Pentalus, I can't freaking say it, the Pentaltus Oculatus dialogue?
Oculatus.
Yes, after the Civil War.
If I'm aware of that dialogue?
Yes.
Yeah, where I believe that they say something along the lines of, I hadn't actually believed that the Stormcloaks would be able to capture Solitude or something like that. I read it a few days ago, and also before that when you sent it to me, so yeah, I'm aware of it.
You weren't aware of that when I told you about it?
I was, but not consciously, if that makes sense. I mean, I'd heard the dialogue before, and I've heard it before as an argument, but I didn't necessarily... I don't necessarily put any value to that argument within the context that I've heard it in before, if that's the... So maybe you bring it into a new context where I will. So please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing where it just doesn't begin to make sense for me. Why would the Pentaltus Oculatus agents be put in Skyrim? Why would the Emperor himself be put in Stormcloak territory, engage in Imperial weddings with the Stormcloaks, right, in the Stormcloak government? Why would the Emperor himself be in the capital of the Stormcloak territory, right, with Pentaltus Oculatus agents spread all across Skyrim, right? And of course Stormcloak, Ulfric has to be wary of this. If the Stormcloaks are expecting an invasion, or the Imperials are about to invade, why could it not be rational or logical to assume that they have some sort of contract or peace treaty or anything like that signed, especially when they both don't like the Thalmor?
The simple and very, 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 very boring explanation to this would of course be gameplay reasons. I mean, they don't want to shut you out of any quests. But I mean, I haven't been stopped by that before on my channel, so I definitely won't drag that argument on here. But just to have said it for the record in this case. It's one of those things... Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, go. You go ahead.
It's one of those things where even, in our own history, in our own world history, if you just agree that that's comparable, because we have before on the debate, then we have seen before that even in medieval times, kings of one country would visit kings of another country, even when they weren't at the best of terms with each other, to, for example, be there at weddings, because everybody was just always intertwined. And I think that Ulfric, for all his flaws, wouldn't stop the Emperor being there in Solitude to attend his cousin's wedding, because even Ulfric knows that he cannot risk all-out war with the Empire, and that he better avoid that at all costs. So if he would say to the Emperor, no, you can't come to attend your cousin's wedding, that would be another provocation. And we know for a fact that Ulfric just wants to take back Skyrim and not provocate the Emperor any further, and not get an all-out war with the entirety of the Empire. I mean, he literally says that during the Stormcloak questline. If you want to take Solitude, but the Emperor is there to visit, he literally says something along the lines of, we can't risk all-out war with the Empire if we attack when the Emperor is there. So it makes sense for the Stormcloaks at least to allow the Emperor on their land, and it would fit within real-world tradition to say that the Emperor would visit to attend his cousin's wedding. Now,
actually,
yeah, sure, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Now, whether that makes all too it's easy to fall back now for me on on the idea that this is just a gameplay mechanic, which it probably is. But I'd say that would be a good reason for the visit to be able to happen.
Sure. Now, may I,
Yeah, sorry.
Sure. Well, the problem with it being a gameplay mechanic, you might be right, but Bethesda made dialogue options for this, right? Bethesda put, lore statements in to fit with the gameplay that was going on. I don't think you could say it's purely gameplay, especially when there's statements in lore and there's statements from important characters, being stated there, right? And I never knew about the, Ulfric talking about the, we can't risk all war with the Empire, so that's new to me. But I'll take your word for it. Ultimately, right, though, the Emperor doesn't attend Victoria Vici, is that her name? Her wedding during the events of the Dark Brotherhood DLC. In fact, he comes later, right, after she died, I think a week later after she died, or, however long, right? And, I think it would just be, reasonable to assume that they may have certain contracts, right? Especially, right, when the Pentaltus Oculatus are not just next to the Emperor, like when he's in, but all across Skyrim, right? So, why wouldn't it be logical or reasonable to assume that the Emperor would say, hey, listen, right, I want to go into your territory, right, and I want my Pentaltus Oculatus agents to, be all around your territory, even though, you're hasty about that. So I'll make a deal with you. I won't invade you, but you will let me come into your territory and let my Pentaltus Oculatus agents in. Wouldn't that be reasonable to assume?
The way you phrase it, it makes complete sense, but there are more things to take into account. For example, that Ulfric wants to be sovereign. He that's I don't know. Do you know what the word sovereign means?
Yes, free, independent, kind of not isolist, if that makes sense.
No,
yes.
He wants to be sovereign is more an idea of self-rule.
Yes, isolationist.
Well, not isolationist. Sovereign literally just means that you're the authority over a certain region. So, sovereign, for example, here in the Netherlands, the sovereignty lies with the government. They have the sovereignty over the country of the Netherlands. And in the Empire, the sovereignty lies with the Emperor, because he is the ruler over the territory. And the idea that a territory is sovereign means that that territory can rule itself without outside intervention. The outside isn't allowed to intervene in it. And having the Pentaltus Oculatus everywhere around the province as a matter of contract between the Emperor and Ulfric, I mean, I definitely concede that it's a possibility, but the whole idea of Ulfric wanting to be independent and him wanting Skyrim to be sovereign, that really doesn't fit within it. I mean, within our own universe, we have had examples. I mean, if you think, for example, Germany after World War I, where they were basically just occupied by, well, they weren't occupied, but they were put under heavy moderation by
the Treaty of Versailles.
By the Treaty of Versailles. People said that was a huge breach of German sovereignty, and that's how the people viewed it. If Ulfric, after completely whipping the Empire's ass, would allow the Pentaltus Oculatus to be this sort of shadow agency around this province, if he would consciously allow that within lore, that would really be out of character. And that would suggest that even before the Civil War began, that was the plan all along. Which, if that was the plan all along, we don't really get it confirmed. I mean, if anything, I think that the whole the note that basically sparked the video that sparked this debate with I
understand what you're trying to say. It's out of character for Ulfric to do, but
I mean, it's not just out of character, because it would completely breach Skyrim's sovereignty. And in the meantime, there is actual proof, not just possible gameplay proof. There is actual proof of the Empire massing an actual legion near the border with Skyrim. I mean, that's the whole point of the note, which you can find after Stormcloak Victory at Fort Neugrad, which can only be taken if the Stormcloaks are going for victory, because once the Dragonborn is at that point, they can no longer turn back, and the Stormcloaks will be victorious in the end. then there will be that very specific note on the Emperor's dogs forming a new force in the south at Pale Pass. And that Ulfric really needs to send reinforcements, or as the note goes, or all our gains will be for naught. Almost like a sort of severe hint of panic by that commander of the fort, where he's like, send us reinforcements now, or we might be in big trouble. We have evidence of that actually happening. We have that sort of little note of what's actually happening down south the border once the Civil War is over. So, while I'd say, yeah, it's weird that the Penitens Oculatus are still allowed in there, you also need to realize that they are not just operating in the open. I mean, the whole idea of a Penitens Oculatus outpost in Dragon's Bridge, I don't even know how open that really is, like if it's just a secret or something, because we know that the Penitens Oculatus is essentially the Empire's secret service, and that they are also employed in enemy territory. They are in Valenwood, for example, assisting Bosmer rebels, and we learned that in the Infernal City. We also know that they do operate openly as the Emperor's guards, thus making it having it make sense that they are in the province at the time of his visit, and that they are allowed in the province at the time of his visit.
May I, speak now?
Yeah, well, of course.
No offense, but that was kind of a long shotgun, so I'm gonna have to address your
I'm really sorry. I talked too long.
Yeah. But ultimately, let me see everything you said. Out of character and doesn't make sense. Okay.
I can really quickly sum it up if you want.
No, I understand what you said. Really, to be honest, right, for the first point, about Skyrim being taken over by the Imperials, right, and him being, want to be sovereign. Why wouldn't it make sense? Because he does ultimately, the most thing that he wants right now is Skyrim's independence, right? So I'd say it would make more sense to say, okay, we're going to have to give up a little bit of our sovereignty. We're going to have to give up sovereignty altogether, right? But we can still become independent, and we can still become our own nation, to let the Penitens Oculatus members in, right? Second of all, wouldn't necessarily be out of character for Ulfric, because we know by the before the events of Skyrim that after the Great War ended and the White Gold Concordat was signed, he resented the Empire after that. But when he took over Markarth, he actually let the Empire in, despite hating them, right? He let the Empire within Markarth and said, okay, I'm going to give you back Markarth, right? But you're going to give me, I don't know, Talos worship, right? So we know that even he'll make deals with people he doesn't even like, right? Or doesn't even agree with, in exchange for something that he ultimately wants more than anything, right? So it wouldn't be out of character for him to necessarily do that. What was the other premise you made?
Is it better that I don't even remember it myself? The note at Fort Neugrad, where we have actual proof of a legion assembling down south once the Stormcloaks are on the winning hand.
You're more knowledgeable on this than me. How much is a legion?
Legion is never defined in lore, and it's defined once in the Infernal City, but then again, it doesn't really make. They just throw the word around really nonsensically. The exact quote I printed. The only thing as a preparation I did for this video is print out the script that I had for my video then. And they don't really necessarily say Legion, but the literal thing they said is, but now I have word of a new Imperial force, so not necessarily Legion, assembling to the south, ready to advance on our position as Pale Pass is clear. Send reinforcements, or all our gains will be for naught. That's the exact thing that they say.
Mm-hmm. I'll address that point one at a time. I thought it said Legion, but I'm not sure. Ultimately, could I use? I know Skyrim Bruma is not canon, and I don't like when people use it as canonical source. But can I use it as an example?
Use it as an example, but don't use it as an argument.
No, I'm not going to use it as. I'm not.
Severe mistakes.
Yeah, I'm not going to use it as an argument. In Skyrim Bruma, right? You have these several forts that are put up around, the Skyrim border, bordering Falkreath, right? And that, when we see a note, we actually hear, them talking about, them supplying those forts up just to guard the border, right? I'm not saying that that's actually what's happening, right? But I'm saying something similar to that could have happened, right? They could not necessarily be. There's also things called a defense force, right? A force is a very vague term. There's a defense force, right? And then there's an invading force, right? When you say force, you might think of an invading force, especially within the context that it might be a little bit more persuading to think that it's an invading force. But like, I kind of think of that, like, based on everything we've talked about, it could be more probable that it's a defense force, especially since, you know, they want to ultimately, like, keep their most important troops at the border with the Dominion. I think that it would be just highly probable, based on everything that we've talked about, that it could just be a defense force and nothing else. But, you know, you might disagree with that.
I do disagree with it, because I know... I would completely agree with you if the note wasn't so specific, if the Stormcloak commander of the fort didn't exactly say that this force is ready to advance on our position once Pale Pass is clear, and that he's received word of that from the south. So I would completely agree with it if we didn't have that exact specification, because it makes absolutely no sense for the Emperor to remove that many troops from the border, especially when he could make a deal with Ulfric, perhaps. But the fact that the note specifically mentions it has me staunchly disagreeing with it.
Sure. Now I want to go in. I don't remember that part of the note, but I'll take your word for it. Well, we can assume that this is, you know, definitely after the events of the Civil War, but we know the Dark Brotherhood and stuff, and the Pentateuch Oculatus and like everything that we mentioned also happens after the Civil War. So this is a hypothetical, so, you know, I can't confirm anything, but to be fair, like, we don't know that, like, the force that is actually invading. For all we know, that they're just, like, making a complete U-turn back to, you know, the Dominion. That I think it could be possible, right? That they saw these invading forces coming, right? And Ulfric made the deal with the Emperor to, you know, keep its sovereignty, to keep its territory, right? And just ultimately say, okay, like, lean back with your troops, right? Especially with all the context that we have, right? Also, I don't think it's very probable, because, no offense, but a lot of the Stormcloaks are very stupid. I think you would agree with that. I think that you would notice that, like, them noticing, like, a force, like, that could just be marching there for a defense force. You know, I think it wouldn't be, you know, out of character for them to all, like, just go under the first thing that, you know, hits their eyes and say, oh, they're invading, right, when that could not be the case. So I think, due to them not being the brightest of, you know, the brightest in the bunch, I think that it could just be them misinterpreting what's happening. Ultimately, but, you know, that's my interpretation. That's what I think, and I'm not going to say anything that I say is valid 100%.
This is just your idea of Stormcloaks being very stupid. It made me laugh, because you're right in that sense. However, the reason I put so much weight on this note, the reason that I pull it as my main argument in that video, and the reason that I pay so much mind to just a few sentences, is the fact that there's two versions of this note. The one that's there before the Stormcloaks take over the fort, in which the Imperial legate of the fort basically says, let me see. As ordered, I have assumed command of Fort Neugrad. Morale is low, and the ongoing chaos in Helgen has left our supply lines dangerously vulnerable. Pale Pass is all but closed due to avalanches in the mountain. We need more support. Our garrison will not withstand an attack. They put that specifically there to basically tell the player, yeah, you can't go south because Pale Pass is just completely destroyed by avalanches, and yeah, you need to stay in Skyrim. And then later, they very purposefully changed that note. Like, the writers placed the original note there and then very purposefully changed the note to saying that the Stormcloak commander has received word of a force assembling there that's ready to move on Skyrim once the Pale Pass avalanche is cleared. And that Pale Pass avalanche will only clear after your gameplay, because it's there to keep you in Skyrim. So that's why I put so much value in this one note. And while I agree with you that it could be a misinterpretation, I don't think it would have been placed there so specifically if this wasn't a sort of get out of jail free card for Bethesda to basically just say, yeah, the Imperials took back Skyrim. I'm not saying that it's definitely going to happen, and you could be right for all I know, but it opens up the possibility for them to basically say, yeah, they took back Skyrim.
Yeah, but may I address the point, or do you have still things to say?
No, you addressed the point. Once I completely fall quiet, unless I say something like, yeah, my English or something like that, you can speak. I'm sorry for
yeah. I don't think, thinking about it, right, of course the note would change, because I don't know why they would need, extra men at the border, to guard the border when they already occupied the Pale Pass, right? It wouldn't make any sense to me, right, if they occupied it already and sent reinforcements from a legion there, right? I think it would make more sense if they lost it and realized, okay, we're vulnerable here now, we can send a defense force, right? And the Stormcloaks misinterpreted that. Of course, they purposely changed it. I do think that they're sending troops there, right? I'm not that stupid, right? I do think that they're sending troops there for some reason, right? But I think it's very logical to assume that, since they lost it, right, that the reason that they didn't send troops there before, right, is because they already occupied it and didn't need to worry about, that line of defense. While in this case, right, they don't have it anymore, and they need to secure their borders more frequently, right?
I agree with the fact that, well, I don't necessarily agree with what you said, but I agree with the idea that we can't exactly know whether this is a defense or attack force. I am personally very convinced by the way that they phrased it and by the way that they purposefully put it there, that it's likely more than a defense force. But you are completely right in saying that the Stormcloak commander could.
I mean, these are the same guys. These are the same guys where you could literally walk up to them, giving them Stormcloak orders, and an Imperial officer's uniform, and accept it and give you money to buy a drink. So I don't think these generals are necessarily the smartest, bunch, as we discussed earlier. As well as of course you have the right to believe, based on the implications that the note has, to assume that it could be talking about an invasion. But what I like to do, right, because Elder Scrolls is a verse where, not everything is just as it seems. You have to look for outside context as well, that exists. If you look at everything given to you at face value, you're not going to understand anything, right? So that's why I was talking about the other things before I mentioned the defense force that could potentially be built up there, because to give, background support or background evidence or possible, circumstances to support this case, right? So I think that because of the things that I've seen in the game, and because of the things that I've noticed in the game, I think it would be very logical to assume, especially considering the Stormcloak army, that this could have a high possibility of being a defense force. But you're right. If you're going to use the note's implications alone, it's more than likely to attack. But I don't like to use implications based on one source alone.
I agree with you that implications from one source alone aren't enough in that sense. But I'm personally not convinced by the outside arguments, like, for example, the Emperor's visit not necessarily making sense, and the Pendus Oculatus being there in Skyrim, or that the Empire might make a deal with Ulfric at all. I mean, sure, the possibility is there, and I am stuck on my pedestal of having to defend the proposition, because in a reasonable discussion, I think I would already... I mean, I've basically said in my Politics of Tamriel at the Moment video that I think that if Ulfric becomes independent, he'd better try and get a deal with the Emperor. Whether or not that has already happened, we can still disagree on. I think that it would be the wisest thing for Ulfric to do. But take it from the Emperor's perspective. Ulfric can't necessarily be trusted in most of the time. I mean, he's the same guy who was there at the moot which elected Torrig. He voted for Torrig, and he basically had the respect and trust of Torrig, and then he just straight up killed them without any discussion on Skyrim's future. He is power hungry in that sense. I mean, I think we can agree on that. And I wouldn't see him as a good partner for a deal for the Emperor. Like, if the Emperor has any sense in his head, he wouldn't make a deal with that. And he'd better just sacrifice one legion and take it back if he can.
To be fair, I'll attack a few of your positions. To be fair, this Titus Mede that we see isn't the smartest Emperor that we've ever had. I mean, he's the same guy who, went into, Skyrim territory when he knows that the Dark Brotherhood is out for his head, right? He's not really thinking, I don't think, 100% about everything. I think he's acting more on his emotions. I can't prove that, of course, but based on what, him just going out into Skyrim while he knows the Dark Brotherhood are active for him and are operating in Skyrim primarily, I don't think he was thinking logically about that at all. I don't think he thinks that what's his name, Ulfric is not trustworthy, because Ulfric for the most part does keep his word about things. When he does say things, he will keep his word. I've never seen him really be dishonest about anything. Sure, he can be greedy, sure he can be scummy, sure he can be power hungry, but I don't see him being dishonest in anything. And I don't think the Emperor would see that either. He literally, when he said, okay, I'll give you Markarth, just give me back Talos worship, he kept that, deal perfectly fine. In fact, it was the Empire who betrayed him, and went back on their word, technically. But, with all this in mind, right, in regards to the moot, we don't know enough about that. We don't know if Ulfric really did vote for him, right? I mean, sure, we can use implications that they say that the moot voted for him, right? But by that law, but we don't know if everyone in the moot voted for him. Perhaps Ulfric didn't want him, right, in the moot, right? It's just because, a Senate votes on something doesn't mean everyone in that Senate votes on something. There could be one or few people, it's just the majority. So that's always a possibility.
I'm gonna address this point by point. First, I'll start with your last argument of Ulfric might not having voted on Torek. This is something that you're right on, that we do not necessarily have the complete confirmation of him having done so. However, we do know that Ulfric was greatly respected by Torek, and that Torek, because of his respect and trust in Ulfric, would have done nearly everything Ulfric wanted. At least that's the implication that we get from the mage Sibyl Stentor, who says that she raised Torek, so she probably knew him quite well. So if we go from there, I'd say that Torek might have reconsidered his own claim to the throne if Ulfric would vote against him. If we go, of course, from the idea that the dialogue from Sibyl Stentor can be trusted, I think that making that chain of argument, that you can reasonably say that at least Ulfric didn't have any reservations about him going there. We don't have the exact confirmation that he did vote, but we also know that at the time he must have been okay with it, because otherwise, considering the amount of respect that Torek apparently had for Ulfric, if we can believe the mage's dialogue, he would have definitely reconsidered his own standing as High King. Now, your point on Ulfric not being trustworthy. I didn't necessarily mean that Ulfric isn't a man of his word in day-to-day operations, but I do think that if we take the idea that Ulfric at least was okay with Torek as a... oh god, the milkman. Alright, I'm gonna edit that out of the video. If Ulfric was okay with Torek as a king, and Torek had the loyalty of Ulfric as a king for at least a long while, he did rebel against him. And a rebellion against someone you're supposed to be loyal towards is the ultimate form of betrayal, essentially. So if Ulfric betrayed them before, I'm not saying that Ulfric will do it. I'm just saying that from the Empire's perspective, Ulfric might not seem the most trustworthy type, and not really the type of person you'd like to make a deal with if you can also just whip his ass with an actual Imperial Legion. Now, on your final point of Titus Mede not being smart, I'd like to at least put a side note to that, where I think that he at least has proven that he is one of the smarter emperors, because he's not just wasting, like, he's not falling for the Thalmor's trap who want to, like, bait him into sending good legions to Skyrim, at least. if the force at Fort Nugrad doesn't take people from the border, he isn't really falling for the trap of the Altmeri Dominion, or at least for the time of Skyrim's playthrough, he isn't falling for the whole trap of sending legions away from the border. So in that sense, he politically is pretty smart, and from what we know, he can, at least from what we learned in the Infernal City and Lord of Souls books, we know that the Emperor can almost blindly trust the Penitens Oculatus, and that they are the best. And well, apparently they got bested by the Dark Brotherhood, but for all terms and purposes, when the Emperor visited, he was assured by the Penitens Oculatus, which are the best security force across at least the Empire, that there was no threat. And if the President of the United States hears from the CIA there's no threat, he will also go, even though we, as the Dark Brotherhood, or whoever in the real world, even though we know that there's a threat, he doesn't know, because he is being assured by the people he relies on that there is no threat. So the stupid or the dumb part in Titus Mead comes more from his subordinates than from himself, I'd say.
I'll attack that point if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's what you're here for.
I mean, in the same dialogue when we talk to him, he even like tells, what's his name, Commander Mallow? Is that his name?
Commander Morrow, yeah.
Oh, Commander Morrow, right. He even tells them that he knew he couldn't stop the Dark Brotherhood and never could, right? So even though he was being assured, that still doesn't make sense, right? Even if he's being assured by, the Penitens Oculatus, because he has a gut in his feeling that, they're still out there, and he knows that they can't, fully be destroyed. So, he knew that the Dark Brotherhood was still out there, right? Especially, when you talk to him, right? I don't think, him being assured by the, CIA, would be...
It's an interesting... Sorry, go ahead, sorry.
No. I'll attack you can respond.
It's an interesting way of thinking. I agree with you within that hypothetical. But the thing what I wanted to illustrate is that apparently there was such a pressing political matter that he had to visit Skyrim, even though it's occupied. That was the word I was looking for. Even though it's occupied with Stormcloaks, there was such a pressing political matter that he absolutely had to go to Skyrim. And if you absolutely had to, and your security force says, yeah, we can do it, and you've always been able to rely on them, he'd say, yeah, even though I'm not 100% sure, they have never let me down before, so I'll go, because there's apparently such a pressing matter that he has to go. So I wouldn't necessarily blame that on his intellect, but more on for example, I am not very good at flying a plane, even though I know that, for example, the engine of a plane is on fire, but the guy that I rely on, the pilot, says, don't worry, I can still land it. I'll have to trust in him, even just like the Emperor has to trust in the Penitens Oculatus, because they're the security experts, and he isn't, and his job is to deal with the political matters that brought him to Skyrim in the first place.
Yeah, and I'll go with that, but I was just gonna address a few things. One, you even mentioned that this was a pressing political matter. I don't think it was that pressing to the point where he had to endanger his life, especially when it could be resolved by something. Sure, it might make him look like a bit of an asshole, but I think he would understand that his life matters more important. That even risking, even risking his own life would be kind of, cautious. So while this is a big political thing, right, I don't think it's that big to the point where he should sacrifice his entire empire for it. Another thing what was another point you brought up beforehand?
I was talking about, just looking at my notes here, Ulfric, that he is not that trustworthy from an Imperial perspective. Yeah, that's basically it. Together with that, I tried to refute that Titus Mead might be smart.
Yeah, I do think that you can be smart in certain aspects. I shouldn't have said stupid, right? That's a very vague word.
I don't even believe that you said that. That's just what I made of it. I believe you said something like not very smart or something.
Yeah, I do think you can be smart in certain aspects, but I mean, for example, what was his name in Oblivion when you go to like talk to him about the aliens and he puts this crown on his head and becomes possessed. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I know who you're talking about, but I completely forgot his name.
Well, I mean, to be fair, he probably one of the most knowledgeable people on alien society and magic in general, yet he couldn't get prepared or like actually thought about the implications that would actually lead him sacrificing all to become a king of a civilization that doesn't exist, and being prepared for the going in an ancient ruin with ghost figures and all this. So I do think you can be smart in certain aspects but not in others. I should have phrased that a little bit better. Also,
I understand your point completely. Don't worry.
Yeah, I also think that even you mentioned a good point about stress and political matters. I think that it would actually be, I don't think they know 100%. I know they know that the Stormcloaks are weak, but I don't think they know exactly how weak. We don't even know ourselves how weak they are. Perhaps for all we know, after the events of the Civil War, they gained a massive. They kind of gained, pull to Germany, where after World War I, they gained one of the strongest militaries of all time. So perhaps after realizing that this is a dire situation, in a desperate attempt to, resolve this all as quickly as possible, they could have, made a contract, and signed that with the Stormcloak, saying that, okay, don't invade us, and, we won't, and like, we'll have peace. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering, I'm getting tired.
It's okay. I have the same. My English is not that great. But can I try?
No, you can go ahead.
All right. I see your points, but I do wish to make another side note to it, because Titus Mead, what you say with that the political matters might not be that pressing, that's not necessarily something that we know, because they have never really specified why he had to come to Skyrim. We literally just don't really know why. Like, we know that the cause was the Vittoria Vici wedding, and the fact that everything went to shit there. Probably he had to
May I add on that?
Yeah, sure.
I think it was actually stated by someone that the reason why he was going was to resolve that issue and try to like bring down, the tension that was there. But I don't have the source on me.
Yeah, the thing is, that's just not something that the Emperor does. It's like, maybe that's always the way I interpreted it, as at least, because there was a Penantus Oculatus agent at the wedding, that he sort of guaranteed the security to the wedding, and that's why he had to come to sort of face the penalty himself. That's basically the way I always interpreted it, but we don't know exactly why he came. Like, why would an emperor, like, he has so many things to do during the day, why the hell would he come to Skyrim to solve some sort of small matter, especially when Skyrim is already controlled by the Stormcloaks? I think that there was probably something else he had to discuss, but we don't know the details on that, and I can't really back that up with anything.
I don't mean to interrupt you. Mind if I add to that?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure necessarily myself. Like, there's no way for us to 100% know. I really couldn't tell you myself. Perhaps, I just don't think it would be very smart for, him having his ship next to the most guarded place by the Stormcloaks in all of Skyrim, while he's invading. Like, the Stormcloaks are going to seize him immediately and take him as hostage, especially, if he doesn't have a contract or anything signed with them. I think, I don't think I don't think Ulfric would attempt something like that, but I don't think Tolia, the Emperor necessarily knows Ulfric's intentions 100%. So I think it would be logical for him to like assume that, okay, if I don't sign a contract with this person or like sign a peace negotiation, they might actually take me as hostage. So I'm gonna sign a peace negotiation with them, and I'm gonna like keep them from. I'm gonna keep my troops from invading them, but I can also solve some crises that are going on in this province, and I can solve my own political issues that may or may not be major. We don't know.
I mean, that argument makes a lot of sense, and it's a full possibility that that's the case. I don't see an actual sort of peace contract being established between the Empire and Ulfric, because the Empire doesn't know whether it can rely on Ulfric to keep his promise, because, I mean, he rebelled before. What's stopping him to do it again? But something that I do, that I completely forgot to address earlier. Oh right, it was the point on Titus Mead entering, even though he knew that the Dark Brotherhood is out for him, and even though you could even extrapolate this to even though he knows that the Stormcloaks are around, because essentially what I said was, which you refuted, was that the Emperor has to rely on their judgment whether or not he can come, and I don't remember the exact premise, but I wanted to add a little bookmark to that, where there's a difference between subjective and objective freedom, where the Emperor can feel very unsafe, meanwhile that's the subjective side, meanwhile objectively he is safe, and that's something that we use in real life, where, for example, I can feel very unsafe in my village, even though the police and everybody else says, you know, it's safe, don't be paranoid. So the objective situation is I'm safe, meanwhile the subjective situation is I feel horrified. So even though the Emperor might feel unsafe, he has to rely on his objective safety on the Penitus Oculata. So if the Penitus Oculata say, yeah, you can go, and especially since we can assume that they never let him down before, he'd say, okay, against my own gut feeling, I'll go, because they say that it is safe, and thus I am objectively safe, even though I don't feel so subjectively.
I definitely do see your point. But again, this just comes back to it. If he doesn't feel like, I don't know why he would assume that it's objectively safe, you know, if he doesn't have something agreed upon with the Stormcloaks, and, you know, this is kind of an enemy territory that we're planning on invading. But, you know, with all of this in mind, I don't think, you know, I think we've talked about pretty much everything that there is to talk about with this situation. I don't think there's any further we can go with this. So if you'd want to, I think we should just, you know, leave it up to the audience, or leave it inconclusive.
I have to say that this has been one of the more interesting the discussions that I've had in a while. I had a lot of fun though, and I have to say that your arguments were good, and well, I have to concede in this sense where I have to defend my position. I think that you brought good points. You didn't necessarily convince me, but you might have convinced a lot of people, so if you want, you can count it as a win. Because I think that your argument, especially the political arguments with the Emperor not visiting unless there's a deal, I think that's a very good argument, and I think that that's something that at least I should have taken into account back when I made my video on it. So, in that sense, you brought some good things to the table, and I'm surprised to say I hadn't heard the argument before, so very good job. Something that I did wanted to say somewhere in the video, because I actually spent time looking it up before, because I didn't know where it was, is that for the people that are going into the comments like, yeah, but we don't know whether there are local recruits which are just fighting in Skyrim. We get that confirmed multiple times by dialogue, and there's also a quote in the Manual of Armor and with Barent, who basically says that normal...
Doesn't Tullius say that if, like, I didn't have a bunch of, like, I don't know, farmers on my hand...
Yeah, he literally says to Ulfric at High Hrothgar. I couldn't find the quote on the wiki, but I swear I remember it.
He says it in the castle. That's what he said. I think that's what he says.
In the castle, he says to the Dragonborn, like, yeah, from the war... from Cyrodiil, the war looks just like a sideshow, and the Emperor won't give me any reinforcements, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I tend to remember that in High Hrothgar, in the whole negotiations thing, I really remember him saying something along the lines of, Ulfric, I've been fighting you only with a handful of legions. If the Emperor would give me what I had to, I'd beat you in a second. And I don't really remember what Ulfric said, but that's something that came up during the negotiations, and it hasn't been properly documented anywhere online, so I didn't want to bring it up as an argument, but I really need to replay that questline again and see if I can get it on a screenshot, because that was very interesting dialogue, and I was personally very surprised by it.
Well, I enjoyed this conversation personally. You know, I did not expect to, you know, actually have to use that in the Imperial contract argument. I was not like, I honestly, to be honest, like I thought it said Legion, not Force, and I thought you would know something about a Legion. I was kind of like, I was unsure on what a Legion is. I don't know, like, exactly. It could be 100, it could be 3,000.
From the top of my head, in somewhere in the Infernal City and Lord of Souls, the books, it says the exact size of a Legion. I remember it saying it somewhere in the books, but I read those books a long time ago, and I really don't remember. I believe it was 5,000 per Legion, but I really can't say.
Also, I'd be happy for all the claims that I've made and for everything that I've said. I know you didn't really care about them, but for further reference, if you ever want proof for any of the things you're saying, right, or like for any of the claims I made, just to show that I'm being 100% legitimate, I would be happy. In fact, I could actually post them in general so that people can actually see. I enjoyed this, right? Thanks for everyone who attended. I hope I wasn't, too annoying to listen to. I hope I didn't go on too many tangents. And yeah, thanks for having me, Imperial Knowledge.
Anyway, thanks everybody also for attending. Thanks again to Kenny Dawkins for wishing to do this first tryout debate with me. I had a lot of fun. I hope that it's fun to watch/listen. And yeah, I'll see everybody next time in the next lore video. See you later. Hi, this is post-recording Imperial Knowledge again. I hope you enjoyed this. If you made it all the way through, good job. I mean, we're at 1 hour and 20 minutes. That's pretty long. If you're interested in having one of these debates with me, it's not just exclusive to, like, this one guy. If you want to debate me, send me a message on Discord and on email. My email's on my channel. I can't debate everybody, but if you bring an interesting topic, we might just do it, and we might just upload it on the channel. So yeah. See you later. I'm gonna work on the next lore video. This was a lot of editing for the audio. I hope it was worth it.